So yeah, so now it's recording. So please let's start with tell your name, where you are now.
Okay. Oh, so thank you. I'm John Blend, and I'm doing this interview from my study downstairs in London. I'm in West London. We have a weird weather in London, as you probably know. It kind of changes almost by the minute, but at the moment I can see sun, which is lovely. And it's very nice, Camilla, to have this opportunity to talk. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thank you too. So our questions, the first part of it concern you as a human being. So if you were to tell me something of yourself, yeah, as a being, as a
Okay.
Mm.
I'm the oldest of two. My brother lives in France and has lived there for many years. And come from a refugee family. My mum was Viennese. She came here just before the war on the Kindertransport, or in the very early part. And my father's family, back a generation, fled from the pogroms in Russia and Belarus. So I've always felt a kind of kindred or a connection with Europe. And I feel it very strongly when I'm in Eastern Europe. It may sound blasphemous to say, but you know, when I eat the food of Eastern Europe, I feel like I'm connecting with my family. Maybe in some way people have that experience when they connect with something in a religious way. Or maybe it's just my excuse for liking Polish bread. I don't know.
But, I know that you're gonna continue, but just to stop you here for a moment. So you visited this eastern part too. I mean, like Eastern Europe. Or not.
Some parts. When I was a teenager, there was this great scheme called Interrail, which meant for a very small price, young people could travel anywhere they wanted in Europe spontaneously. You just had a little booklet, you filled in where you wanted to go. So this was before, with former Yugoslavia, for example, you could decide to go and have, I don't know, to visit one place for swimming, and then hop over the border to Trieste and have pizza or ice cream, and then go somewhere else. And if you needed somewhere to stay and you didn't have somewhere to stay, you could sleep on the trains. And in those days, that's what happened. There was probably a lot less traffic, but it was a fun way to get around. And that's how I started to get to know what now is the, you know, little bits of what is now the Czech Republic, or but Poland was more recent for me. But I grew up in a family that had, as I say, a strong connection with this part of our lives, really, so that some of the toys that I had as a young kid, I later discovered were very simple Russian toys. And the kind of babushkas and matryoshka type things, but also a little plate that had chickens feeding on it. It was kind of like a table tennis bat, and you would go like this, and there was a little ball underneath, and all these chicken heads made out of wood were attached through string to this little ball down the middle of the bat. And very simple toys. You know, when I went to India many years later, I came across similar, very ingeniously made, simple toys that could keep kids amused for hours. So that was my early, my kind of, my roots, I suppose, in terms of growing up in that kind of family. But because it was a Jewish family with a lot of ambivalence and mixed feelings about, if there was a God, how could he let 6 million die in that way? And because there was a lot of anti-Semitism in UK, I think, when I was growing up, I kind of hid. It became like the shadow side of me a lot, because it was scary, and parents didn't talk about it much. And in the newsagents' shop windows, the places where you would go to buy a paper or cigarettes for some, there could be little cards advertising places to stay. And they would say, no blacks, no Irish, no Jews, no dogs. It's kind of like we were the dogs of the world, all of us. So there was quite a bit of anti-Semitism, and I think I kind of retroflected a lot of that into myself, and it was only in more recent decades that I've undone that and become proud of who I am, or proud of that side of my identity. I'm not a religious person, but I have a great interest in and empathy for those who are. And that's partly, I think, through having traveled a lot in my youth and visited temples and mosques and many places of worship. And both being slightly appalled in some cases by the sacrifices people have made in the name of gods, but also appreciating the peace and the silence often and the beauty in simple places where you could just go. Yeah. In fact, when I got married, my wife and I chose a Quaker place to have our party, our ceremony rather. And there's something about the speak when you've got something to say idea, I think, that goes with not having an organized religion that I really like. Yes. Goodness. So yes.
Well, it strikes me because I am, somehow familiar with, well, I'm from Poland, so anti-Semitism is, very, I mean, it's like a quality here of our country, we could say. And Łódź, in particular, is a very multicultural city, of this, with its history of the 19th century, Jews, Russians, and German crossing their paths here, but I wasn't aware of this anti-Semitism in the UK that much. It was these were like or which years you are now referring to mostly?
Well, I'm thinking to around the beginning of World War II, and there were debates in Parliament about whether they should let refugees in, and there was quite a lot of anti-feeling in some of what we call the red top papers. These are papers that are populist, and in a certain section of Parliament was really against this. So it was great that the Kindertransport, these children came in, and other refugees came into the UK, but it wasn't a done deal. Yeah. In fact, I've got here, it's the picture when my mum came over. This is this book she wrote about her experiences, but it's this was the little card that she had around her neck as an identity card at the time. So she really did come on her own, age between 8 and 9. Quite a journey. So I think it has been quite a journey in the UK. We have our there is still a lot of there's a lot of discrimination against many people, many races.
This is something I know, but with this, with this anti-Semitism, I wasn't aware. But you were, if I may ask, you were born in which year then?
I was born in 1954. I'm supposed to be a Cockney. It's the part of East London where people were supposed to talk like this. We're supposed to talk in this very funny way, and well, some do, some don't. And I guess I lost my accent also through experiences of going to school in other places and that. But I do have an affinity with that part of East London, a strong affinity. Although, curiously, I live in West London now. So I've hopped over.
But and also I am somehow I mind with this with the feeling I had once you said that it's only a decade, maybe 2 decades ago, that this feeling, I don't know of what, but of sorrow, maybe of of who you are somehow? Yes.
Well, I think it went through many stages. Initially, as I say, as a young kid, it was shame. And I got beaten up as a child for being Jewish or being a Yid. That was the, if you like, the Y word, you might say. In the same way that various other groups have been pushed around and bashed. So then I think from that and sorrow, over the years defining my fight, and I think probably through my development as a person through Gestalt therapy, being able to own my difference and not feel I have to submerge it or to use my surname, to blend with others, to become confluent. It's like, it's interesting, my family name became Blend. It wasn't originally, it was a different name. But there's something about the refugee experience at a time of danger, which causes, I think, many people to want to assimilate and become just like everybody else, so that you don't stand out. Well, I began to feel, I'm gonna stand out. I don't give a shit. I'm me. And so that shame and sorrow went to one side and got replaced with, I think, some curiosity. Like, what would it have been like? And what is to have grown up differently? What does it feel like to be me now? And how am I me in relation to you, whether you're Jewish, Catholic, whatever? And recently I've been working with Hasidic Jews, the very Orthodox Jews. And it's been fascinating because as a kid, I was both kind of a bit sort of like, these people look strange. They got weird clothes. They probably thought my clothes looked pretty weird too. But to take back those projections and to realize these people, and some of them are, I've had some amazing conversations as a trainer working with people in Haredi communities. It's been so rich and interesting. So I'm having to take back a lot of early stuff, a lot of projection that I've just said, it's all you out there. So in doing that, I think I feel okay to be far more comfortable to be me as a kind of mixture.
Well, I can hear it, and the funny thing is that your surname is Blend. Surname, we say, we always mix that up, and mine is Biały, which means white in Polish.
Wow.
Yeah, I also wonder what it means. My grandfather comes from Ukraine, so. Well, interesting thing about this blend. Wow. So if you were to continue with those characteristics of yours as a human, would you like to add anything to that, what you already said? In terms maybe what you like doing or your passions, I don't know.
Sure, yeah. I have a passion for music. I grew up in a very musical family. My father was a kind of naive, incredibly pianist. He could have been a concert pianist. He was that good. Though he became a doctor and then ultimately a psychiatrist and then a psychoanalyst and all of that. So I grew up in a therapy family, but a musical one. My uncle played in several orchestras. My grandmother, on the Belarus side, used to play in the cinemas, apparently, before they had talking movies. So she would come up and play on this kind of weird Wurlitzer organ in the interval. So a lot of music in the family. I learned piano as a kid, loved it for a while. And then when I became a teenager and I got interested in girls, I realized that actually no girl really wants to date somebody carrying a piano around their neck. Well, that was my thinking anyway. So I picked up the guitar and I became a guitarist from about 14, 15 onwards, played in schoolboy bands. And these days I still play, and if you can see, there's one of the guitars just at the back there. I play in a couple of bands at the moment, and one of the big losses, I think, with COVID is that we can't play because the latency issue, the delay on Wi-Fi means unless you've got amazingly powerful equipment, it's very modern, and you're working off Wi-Fi, you get that time lag, which is infuriating. But that's my passion, music making, and I work sometimes using music in both as a trainer and in the work I do with young people often, because I think you can find music in many ways that fits a mood or a rhythm and dialogue with somebody else, even if it's just beating out a rhythm on yourself. So music has been a passion. Photography in the past was a passion, not so much now. And I play with a theatre group, a couple of theatre groups actually, and we do therapeutic theatre. It's very community or communitas based. And again, that's something I look forward to getting back to when lockdown finishes, because it's a great way to take somebody's life and illustrate it in a different way. And I'm thinking of Irv Folster's saying that he said something like every human's life is worth a novel, or to that effect. And I think in playback, it's a great way of both honoring that and being able to tap into other people's lives for a little bit, see their stories. So some of that I can do now, some of it I miss because I can't do now, but it's there to look forward to in the future.
And if you were to say who, maybe what has the greatest impact on you as a person?
Who's had the greatest impact on me as a person?
Yeah.
Oh, rather than a therapist. That's a tough one. Several people have had impact on me. My parents, I would say, had a big impact on me. And I tussled with them for quite a while in my youth, but I also got to love them too. Many people, friends, trainers. Yeah, difficult to pick out one individual, really.
Yeah, this is what I got from what you already said about yourself and about your background. Yeah, obviously. And how did you come to Gestalt? How did that start?
Started in a funny way, I think, in the 1980s, early 1980s. I'd been in a relationship that wasn't working, and I was getting depressed. And I talked to one of my colleagues. I was working in psychiatry alongside somebody who was training in psychotherapy. And she reminded me that I'd done some taster weekends with various people in psychodrama, in Gestalt, various things. And she said, over one coffee, well, that person you really like, that person who took that weekend, who bowled you over, how about going into therapy or talking about that with him? Now, this was actually somebody running a training institute where I years later then signed up to. And we had a little talk in Termina. I think that was the last time we met up. But he was very gifted at being able to see through people's embodied presence what was going on for them. And he asked me to walk. He said to me, I remember, you look as though you've got a millstone, like a really heavy stone around you. Can you walk across the room? This was in a group, with that millstone. And then I think he probably asked me to do the polarity of that. And I found that so powerful, being able to explore those two parts and then see if I could find another position. It really stuck with me. And so I signed up, and he wasn't available because he was teaching, but his colleague, his assistant, ran an open group, and I joined that for 3 years as a member and got stronger through that, a lot stronger. That was very powerful. More old school Gestalt, I think. But very yeah, there was an immediacy about it. And I really liked that, learned a lot. And then later trained, yeah, went on to train. I thought this is the mode I want to train in. I thought I would never make a Gestalt therapist. That's too grown up, too complicated. I'm not there. I didn't think I could get there. So but there was a shorter training in counselling at the same Gestalt Institute. So I thought I'll try that, give that a go. And I did, and I never really looked back, you know. It was like after I did that counseling training, it's like, well, yeah, I was tough in places, but I want more. I want more. Because we used to train together. We had an annual residential with the psychotherapy students. The whole faculty went away every year for a very powerful 4 or 5 day training. And that could be so life-changing. And also the possibility to see what other people were doing was so inspiring that I found I just had to sign up. So I continued the training for, well, till 2006 when I qualified.
And since then, you've been working as a therapist and and therapies mainly with young people, with children, or?
Well, I work as a therapist and a clinical supervisor. I'm an external moderator for another therapy institute, and I'm just joined faculty for one of the London arts-based child psychotherapy institutes. So yeah, my training work has been with children. I've always had a small practice of working with young people, children and young people from the age of about 5 upwards mostly. And I don't know if it's partly a gender thing or partly a location thing or partly linked to austerity, because I no longer work in the state sector when everything is free, that in private practice I find it harder to get more than a few child clients at a time. But many people want supervision on their work. So I do a lot of supervision work here and abroad, some online, some in person occasionally when I can get there. I trained in 1999. I met Violet Oaklander, and that was at the Manhattan AAGT conference. And actually, if I go back to your question about who's influenced me hugely, it would have to be her, because really that changed my way of working very much, to orienting towards working with young people, even with a small practice, and working with the child or the adolescent in the adult often. Because sometimes I would get clients in their 30s or 40s who'd never had a childhood, or not been allowed to, or had a lot of neglect or deprivation, or had gone through an experience like epilepsy or anorexia, and clients come to see me saying, well, I know you work with young people, but that whole period for me is a blur. I don't remember what happened. So I don't think it's lost by any means to have a focus on working with young people. And obviously, you know, I work with people. I have my oldest client is in her early 70s. I have a slightly different way of working. So every client requires a way of working that suits them and us. But I would say that my work, the influence of Violet on my work has been profound ever since that early meeting. I went out and trained with her the year after. I'm part of the Oaklander Foundation, and we have at the moment, because of COVID, we couldn't have our biannual conference, so we've been having weekly seminars, and it's been a joy to participate in those and to lead a couple of activities. So I think it brought out a more playful side for me. And if I think back, my early life was fairly constrained, you know, it was so maybe I've been needing to recover, what's the word you used earlier? Maybe not to renovate, but to kind of rediscover that child in me, the playful part, that can not feel censored or held back. doesn't interject, oh, I shouldn't do this or I shouldn't do that, but risks just being out there.
Well, yeah, it resonates. I mean, in me, the things you are saying. I don't know whether it is because of this background in Eastern Europe, or is it because of this childhood? I really am somehow with you, and I can feel it. And so you don't, maybe you wouldn't like to be categorized as therapists working with children or with young people. No.
That's one of the, I mean, I do like that. In fact, I've got hanging up there my little sign. I nearly wore it. It's my T-shirt that says Gestalt Child Therapy, you know, counseling and supervision, Oakland away. So yes, I do identify as that, but I also identify as more than that, as somebody who will work with adults, with families. I did a lot of training alongside systemic therapists. I worked in CAMS for 15 years and in adult psychiatry for about 13 years. So my background is really also very much informed by what I've seen and experienced of people in crisis, in breakdown. I didn't mention earlier, but my original training after doing a psychology degree was to get into social work. And social work has always been there in the background with me. Although I think that the change from doing or being a change agent to being with in therapy has been an important journey for me. But yeah, I also like to think that as a Gestalt therapist, I'm getting more familiar also with the languages of other therapies too. And so I don't want to just stick to one set of jargon or one set of terms, but to also think about it in other terms. And working with young people, for example, you know, if you think about how the concepts like attachment have kind of spread across many, many therapies, and also from systemic ideas. Yeah, but I don't want to put myself in a box.
And besides, it's not only about you putting yourself in a box, but as I understood, our humanity is also about being playful.
Yes.
And not only recovery, this childhood period, but also connecting with it, as I understood you. Is it that something like that? I mean, if you could, I don't know, if you think that Gestalt therapy is about that too. I mean, it's about that playfulness side also.
There is a quote from Lynn Jacobs, which I always don't get quite right, but she said something like Gestaltists are free to sing, move, dance, or sit quietly, something like that. So, and Violet's work, which arose out of her training with Jim Simkin way back, you know, very much embraces the Gestalt therapy. That way of being flows and breathes all the way through this. So I think there is sometimes and I can say this, having grown up in perhaps a more regimented way, doctor's son, encouraged to be the good boy, you know, which are constraints against forces, if you like. So narrows down one's opportunity. If you think of, you know, Kurt Lewin's talking about expanding a life space. Well, if we stick in a narrow boundary and are more on a survival footing, you know, I put my hands up like here, that way I can see what's in front of me, but I can't see you or to the sides. So I just concentrate on this to that movement. I think if we take away allow those constraints to go away and to just be who we are and that be enough, you know, that sense of really, can you meet me where I am? If we can do that, then I think that playfulness comes out of us as creativity, as the figure in a graceful way rather than a broken or restricted way. And I think a lot of people get hung up here on the difference between being childish, which is a pejorative put-down term, and childlike. And somewhere I've got a wonderful quotation from Philip Pullman, who's the author, I don't know if you know him, of a very popular, thoughtful series of books called The Northern Lights. It's a trilogy. And he talks about how children and scientists both have this playfulness. And this is what we need for life, to be able to cultivate that. And there's a difference between being playful and being silly. And I think sometimes working, whether it's with adults who have fragile ego, or with young people who are not feeling very certain of themselves, or people who are perhaps in a shame or have a readiness to go into shame, sometimes being able to offer something lightly, not to send it up, not to be stupid or silly, but to be a little light with it. I think that really helps people be able to have a connection without getting into that place of feeling they're wrong or they're bad. There are many people who do this beautifully. Juliana Appelopper is one person who has a wonderful way of using herself to encourage or just see what emerges from a client, rather than saying, you know, I noticed that your head is doing this. I'm caricaturing, but there's something I learned from that ability to be slightly playful in a kind of graceful way, you know. If we look at one of the people I'm very interested in his work, it might have, certainly has been inspirational in recent years, is the attachment and systemic therapist Dan Hughes. And he would say that working with, particularly with young people, he would expect in an average session deflections to happen about 12 times. Now, you know, my take on that, or Violet's take, might be, well, a deflection indicates that the client is full of feelings and can't take any more, you know. But what he does, it's just a lovely thing, is he, rather than do this kind of, I'm going to bust through your defenses approach, he would go sideways. So if the child turns away and sort of starts looking and says, oh, look, there's an aeroplane, Dan would go with the child to the window and sort of say, oh yeah, where do you think that's going? I wonder how many people are on that. You know? And then he'd say, silly me, we were talking about when your parents separated. That was stuff, wasn't it? So he expects to tack, rather like a sailor, won't go straight from A to B, because if they go straight into the wind, they stall, that you learn how to kind of go with it like that. So I'm watching from the breath and the activity and the face and everything else to see, is my client getting full up? Have they done enough for now? And how can we allow an out-breath and not just get stuck into too much contact without having the withdrawal? You know, that thing that Fritz Perls said, that's when he was talking about a heart, he said, that's, a heart is like that, it moves two ways. You know, contact withdrawal, rather like the sea, goes in, goes out again. So we need that opportunity, I think, to just exhale and breathe out and see where we are now.
Well, mental notes now.
Sorry, I have a default of getting into mini teaching mode. You know, I get my soapbox. I hope, I'm sorry if I'm doing that.
No, I like that very much, and yeah, mental note for my yesterday's client. Really brilliant. But yeah, I wonder with this with this thing you are now describing, you would say that you were somehow attracted to Gestalt therapy because of that part of freedom in it, or you would say also that you contribute with your experience, with your years of working, supervising now to Gestalt therapy back, I mean, from these different approaches. How would you, I don't know if that makes sense to you, but I wonder about this kind of influences.
there's a saying, you may have heard of it from, I think it comes from Isaac Newton. It says that we stand on the shoulders of giants. So if I think of the people that taught me, whether it's Violet, whether it's having Carl Hodges as my supervisor before, for a point, some of my tutors at the Gestalt Center, you know, I absorbed so much and learned so much. And then when I came to be a year tutor myself at another institute, the thing I loved was being able to pass on, to do live demonstrations, which actually nobody else in the institute wanted to do. But I felt I had the confidence because I'd grown up in a Gestalt tradition where we walked our talk, where we actually looked at process regularly, rather than just having this as a sort of once monthly lecture or something. And I know not every training by any means has that real emphasis on grounding yourself in your own process and looking at the group. I mean, Bud Feeder, bless him, who's no longer with us, yeah, his book with Ruth Ronald was also incredibly important. The whole idea of a group psychotherapy at a time when that had passed from being in fashion in the UK, it was no longer in fashion. So important, and I really regard myself, although I'm only doing one group at the moment, a supervision group, but those skills are so important. So just to come back to what you were saying about, was this in me earlier or from my own experience? Mm-hmm. I think undoing the retroflexion, learning to let go of that introject of carrying actually what was my parents' and my grandparents' weight. And actually some Hellinger work later on, I think, helped reinforce that, you know, sorting out of what's mine and what's theirs. I think it released a huge amount of energy in me. And I began to be less scared of my own anger and my own ability to be angry, which was difficult when I was growing up. It was rather constrained at times. So one of the joys I have is in working with people of all ages, families, young people, kids, teaching them that actually anger is nothing to be afraid of. It's nothing bad. I hate it when psychologists say it's a negative energy. It's not good or bad. But to become aware of it, to feel your entitlement to have your feelings, just as your brother or your mother is entitled to theirs. To be able to acknowledge it to yourself and find safer ways of channeling it, whether through direct expression or indirect expression, privately. Mm-hmm. And that could include healthy retroflexion when the field conditions don't really make it safe or a wise thing to do, just to simply go and let it all out there. Mm-hmm. So then the kind of sense of residual anger, what's else inside that I've been burying that might be underneath this bit, or grief, And then I think there's often a psychoeducational aspect to this. Now, this is something I work with kids, but if you think of the number of people in prison who have been arrested and charged and locked up because they don't know how to react in a kind of thoughtful way, and they've just become into a default mode of functioning. You look at me this way, wallop. You say something to me, helping people to discriminate. What is the insult? What is the effect of that on you? And what do you want to do with that? To really grade experiences of anger and to grade responses, not in a very manualized way, but to think about it in a personal way. And I've come to that in recent years through teaching work on anger, often with students, often therapy students, who then get very wobbly and shake and say, because it stirs up maybe their own experiences of loud voices or big movements as leading to something violent. And we live in societies where there's often a confusion or conflation between anger and violence. It gets a bad press, anger. It sells newspapers. So if you say that everybody who's angry is the devil, and look at this person, then it reinforces the stereotype that I mustn't get angry, or I must keep that really tightly in. But when we do that, we restrict the self, and we keep our energy dull and stuck, turgid. So I'm really into finding safer ways, and that's starting where the client is, maybe very, very small ways of being able to say, I didn't like that, or that sucks, or, you know, I hate it when you say this, or no, I'm not going to stand for that. And it might be withdrawing or tearing paper. It might be with just speaking to a puppet if it's a child, or even to my dog sometimes. My dog probably will join in if somebody gets cross, and we'll go, oh, yeah, don't you stand for that. At least that's my interpretation of what she's saying, I know. But we can help people of any age, of any background, I think, feel a little more entitled to their feelings, and then to become choiceful. Okay, I feel this. Now, what do I want to do with that? And to think about the field, about forces and constraints. What's going to happen if if my boss passes me over for promotion and I just go, bang, I'm going to end up out of a job and probably in jail. So is there another way to have that conversation, so I just don't keep everything introjected and down, but equally well have a way of responding where I feel in charge of me, rather than feeling there's this mysterious force that takes over, and then I just simply dissociate. Yeah.
And are you willing to write about it and contribute in this way, or you rather concentrate more on teaching and in this way somehow?
I wrote a chapter on this called "Am I Bothered?" In 2010 or 11. It's in the Relational Child, Relational Brain book, which is published by Gestalt Press. And it's basically a lot of examples of working creatively with art, using the arts and talking, of course. It's a dialogue with young people, many of whom are angry. And some of this is through, there's a whole range of ways of doing that. I gave a lecture to the British, the BGJ many years ago. I don't know if it's still around. It started with an exploration of Voodoo Child by Jimi Hendrix, but it was thinking about adolescence and anger in particular. So yeah, I do write about it, and I try and teach it whenever I get an opportunity to teach a way of thinking of anger work, which draws partly on what Violet says, but also goes back to the PhD and the early Gestaltists thinking about different types of anger and what happens when we express it, and what happens if we choke it off or just leave it festering inside. So I think it's one of the most important things we can do, and if we're free with our own anger as Gestalt therapists, I think we can help others be angry with us and explore safely their anger without having to kind of pretty it up or say not now, or you're a bad client, or anything like that.
And I mean, the place where we arrived now somehow started with this, working with children, but I imagine the two are interrelated, and that is where you get, you have got your interest from, I mean, with anger, I mean, from children working.
Absolutely.
Yes, is that...
Adults get angry, parents get angry, mothers are sleep deprived, they feel murderous. So they need to have a way of releasing without feeling guilty or bad about that. And the old Gestalt technique, yes, I've got Coco's bed here, don't think she'll mind. The cushion, the idea that if you are scared of a lot of volume, if you pull a cushion against your mouth when you are angry, that sort of when you pull it across, baby won't have to hear that. And I teach parents or others to say, look, why don't you, when you're back at the end of a day and you've had a really rotten day and you're just spoiling for a fight or whatever, say to your family or those around you or your partner, look, I've had a hell of a day. Oh, hello, Coco. You come in too. maybe she'll share some words too. We were just talking about anger, Cokie, something you know a bit about. I don't bark, but she does. But yeah, it's the idea of a purposeful tantrum. Why should 2-year-olds have all the fun? So I say to the person, the adult, look, why don't you tell the people, your partner, whoever, I've had a hell of a day. I'm just going to go in the room. I'm going to jump up and down and yell, kick and scream. If you can't hear me, will you knock on the door and say, louder? Or if I chicken out after 4 minutes, will you just remind me there's another minute to do? Now, what that does is it gives you permission, I think, to say, this is what I want to do. It lets everybody else in the house know nobody is being murdered and it's not anybody else's fault. Mm. And we all have bad days and we all have things that really piss us off. Mm-hmm. So it's good to be able to do that. And then we let go of that and we're back to our, if we think of the Gestalt cycle, we've not got unfinished business blocking us. We're on to our next bit of living. It's that,
mm-hmm. I guess it is becoming also important to underline it in the times where so much emphasis is on the ground rather than on the figure. It appears somehow old school Gestalt therapy, underlying figure and this act of expressing, whereas it is we cannot neglect it while sticking to the ground and exploring this it of the situation, if I may say so. Because this is what is now the tendency is now to explore this, and I like that you are now somehow paying so much attention to this corner too, I would say.
Yeah, well, we have an old expression here, it's quite old, called kicking the cat. You have cats, don't you? Yeah. So you think how unfair it would be to kick a cat. But this is the thing, if we have old residual angers or griefs inside us that are unexpressed, then we may simply blurt them on to the next person, as in an unprocessed, unfinished way. So I'm really not about saying just be angry, cathart, because we need to think about who I'm angry with, what it's about, and how am I doing this? But it's also about letting go of some of the earlier, maybe, or other things. Maybe I didn't cry when my dog died, or my tortoise died, or when we moved house, or when my marriage broke up. That these are losses that we can. If we can start to mourn them too, and know that as adults or as children, I'm going to show you this. This is something that a colleague of mine drew recently. Mm-hmm. It's for kids, but I think it's for adults too. 4 taps, yes. 4 emotions. You could choose any, but often things like sadness and fear or scare, in the case of younger ones, anger. They often don't get so much of a look in when clients are avoidant, or I'm not using avoidant in the attachment term, they're just saying, they just don't want to go there so much, they're not sure. And there's often an idea that if I turn on the tap of my sadness, I'll never stop, And so I think one of the things we can do as Gestaltists is, in looking at what's in the ground and what's emerging as another, maybe smaller figure, we can help people explore, knowing that you can turn the taps on and off as you wish. And then if your tap spills over, well, it doesn't matter. Or if the tap's dry and there's nothing, that doesn't matter either. It's just where you are, And sometimes I might even, be holding the tears or the sadness for you, if that's the case. And other times not, might have something quite different. But the idea that we can self-regulate, we can turn the taps on and off if we give ourselves permission. Mm-hmm. And then we can see what the flow is like and what are the words that go with this, or the movements, or the the sound, the or the oh. So sometimes simple drawings can help us tap into something.
Well, I wonder what you think about the future of Gestalt therapy. I mean, having said what you said, and somehow sharing with me your interest and your focus. What you think will come next in terms of therapy and practice? And maybe the theory, I don't know. What do you think?
That's a tough question, isn't it? I mean, I'd hope that there is continuing a dialogue between relational forms of Gestalt and other forms of Gestalt, because I think both are really important. And if we neglect one, then we miss something really, really crucial. I'm hoping that the body is coming back into fashion in a funny way in Gestalt therapy. I think for many years, and this was probably when the false memory syndrome debate started to hit the papers, and also ideas not from Gestalt so much, but maybe from psychotherapy worldwide, when ideas of therapist abuse were coming to the fore. During that time, I think there was a retreat. We got away from our beanbags and the floor, and we sat on chairs like this, and I'm lucky, at least this chair rotates. But, there are times when I just got to get up and do something. And I would hate Gestalt to stick with that kind of formalized on-chair, kind of where education is constrained and we just have to jump through these hoops. I think in this country, a lot of Gestalt institutes pursued the masters, as did a lot of other psychotherapy institutes, to get accreditation, but to get kind of accepted, it seemed, in the world of therapy. And in some ways that was a good thing, but I think there was a loss with that, a loss of spontaneity, of diversity. I'm really concerned about the lack of about white privilege and the lack of space for diversity, really at a real crucial level, to be thought about, welcomed and encouraged in therapy centres certainly across the UK. I'm part of a working party that's been looking at that with African and Asian colleagues, because this happens for students who who feel very much in a minority and feel they can be projected onto very easily with less shielding or less defense. Tutors from other countries who feel, well, I don't fit in here, there's no role model for me here, or nobody else who's quite speaking my language. And I would like psychotherapy, as it's taught, to bring in not just the written word, but to bring in the academic sense of essays, but to bring in poetry and video and movement, dance, song, because there are many ways in which culture and learning get transmitted. And I think we have an artificially maintained way at the moment that doesn't serve psychotherapy well. It doesn't mirror the population nearly well enough for psychotherapists really to be seen as people who are not in a very privileged position. So I would like to see that. And it's hard, and we're fighting against and sometimes the medical model, which they're having to fight their corner. There are political moves, to try and be ultra respectable in order to fit in what Parliament or what the government of the day feels is right for us. We could too easily get stuck into a manualized approach that takes all the risk out of Gestalt therapy and the humanity out of it. That would be dreadful. And I think one of the things that Gestalt has brought into other therapies, many of the non-manualized kind, is an emphasis on the here and now as being useful, is an emphasis on embodied working as useful, and many other things. So I think if we think about the differences between, or think about intersubjectivity and how Gestaltists work in dialogue, the Buberian approach, for example, I think I would like to see us building more bridges, having more crossover, maybe more fights sometimes, not becoming confluent, but really being out there in the world and not being ashamed to be who we are as Gestaltists. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Otherwise it gets anodyne and dumbed down and dry, and we're kind of like, oh, is this all right with you? And that's not Gestalt that I grew up with or value or prize.
Mm-hmm. All right, so thank you, John, for this, for the whole interview and for the last manifesto, I would say, which is very important, I guess. And it is funny because I don't know, my
damn.
Now I realize. So somehow, yeah, this is my way of attunement with you.
Yes.
So, okay, so I will stop now the recording. Thank you.
Thank you.